Hi there, it's Tracy Kiernan from stepbysteppainting.net, and I am going to be showing you how to paint this acrylic landscape on an 11 by 14 inch canvas. And I'm going to go ahead and go over brushes and colors. So I used a 3/4 inch flat wash, a 12 bright, which is like a 1/2 inch flat brush, number 4 round brush. And I use this brush. I often call it a scruffy brush. It's kind of like a stencil brush, so it's like this rounded brush with the bristles, not the synthetic fibers, but kind of the natural sort of wiry texture bristles. And that was used for the texture in the trees. If you don't have that, you can use a bundle of Q-tips and kind of achieve the same technique. I used 8 colors for this. So we have Hooker's Green Hue Permanent, Mars Black, Primary Yellow, Burnt Sienna, Brilliant Yellow Green. Dioxazine Purple was used in the little purple flowers on the bottom. You can skip that color if you're not going to do the little flowers. Cerulean Blue and Titanium White. And we are going to go ahead and get started. So I'm working on an 11 by 14 inch canvas, and because this is a landscape painting, it has a horizon line. And I always like to establish where this horizon line is because it helps me figure out where that sky is going to start and stop and where our land is going to start and stop. So this particular design has a horizon line at 8 inches from the bottom of the canvas. So I'm making little marks and doing a horizontal line across. Of course, if you're working on a different size canvas, you're just going to have to adjust that line. It's not in the middle, but it's kind of above the middle, so you can kind of estimate where that would be. So we are going to be doing the sky first, and I have Cerulean Blue and Titanium White on my palette. I'm using a 3/4 inch flat wash brush. Let's go ahead and load our brush in the water and kind of tap it dry, and let's load it in the blue. So we're going to start at the top, and we're doing a gradient of light blue that blends to yellow, and we're going to try our best not to get too much green in the sky, and I'll kind of show you a way around that. But let's just start with a layer of the light blue about 1 inch or 2 down, and then without rinsing your brush, grab your white. You'll want to gently blend that white up into the blue, but you don't have to blend it all the way. So right now we want to get our sky. So we're at the midpoint right now of the sky, and our midpoint should be very, very light. In fact, if you need to wipe your brush off to help alleviate some of that blue, that's helpful. So you can get a rag, wipe your brush off, or you can completely rinse it off and dry. But I'm going to use my paint rag to wipe that excess blue off, and then I'm just going to be grabbing the white. So we are creating a type of sunset where it's blue at the top and yellow at the bottom, and in order for that yellow to blend, we need a whole bunch of white in this area. That white's going to act as a transition between the blue and yellow so the sky doesn't turn too green. We'll get a little bit of green in the sky, but it's not going to be blending from blue to yellow and then green in the middle. So we can take that white and bring it almost all the way down to that bottom line. And then let's go ahead and load our palette with primary yellow. And then we can take our yellow and on our palette, let's just sort of kind of mix about equal parts yellow and white together. It's going to create a really pretty light yellow color. And then let's start at the bottom. Same left and right strokes. And then you want to just very, very gently blend that up to the white. You might need to grab more white to help get that to blend, so that white acts as a transition zone between our blue and yellow. And again, we don't need to over blend it. So if we have streaks of white in there that are not blended all the way, that's okay. And it's okay if we bring that white up into the blue area. We might get it to turn a little bit green in the sky, but that's okay. It's not a bad thing to have a little bit of green in the sky. So just very, very gently blend that up into the blue. We might have streaks, a little bit of green up there into the blue area. That's okay. And then we can always use that white to help transition. So we have this really pretty light yellow sunset, blue at the top, yellow at the bottom. So we can't do anything else up here until that sky dries. There's going to be mountains and a sun there, but let's go ahead and do the bottom part of our landscape while that's drying. So I'm going to rinse the 3/4 off and set it to the side and grab my 12 bright brush, and I'm going to establish where my river is. So we're going to do this kind of like without drawing the river. If you feel more comfortable drawing your river first, you are definitely welcome to do that. I'm just going to use the brush and kind of use the brush, and it's just going to kind of figure out where it's going to go. I'm going to let the river do its own thing here. So to create perspective in this painting, we want our river to be obviously very, very kind of narrow. It's like a 1-point perspective thing. It's very narrow at the horizon line, and I'm going to start not at the center, a little bit off center to the left, and it's not going to be like an exact point like I'm making a triangle. It'll be kind of flat on the horizon line, very, very narrow. And as I'm doing this, I'm kind of wiggling my brush. I'm just using the tip of the brush, so kind of wiggling it back and forth to really establish that shape of the river. So a lot of like wiggling left and right, left and right, left and right, using just the tip of the brush to create those strokes. And by the way, this is just blue and white, about equal parts, blue and white mixed together. If you don't want to mix blue and white, you can just use the blue and we can add white to it later. It doesn't really matter. Just grab that blue and white because I like to blend colors on canvas. As we get down to the bottom of the canvas, our river is so wide that it just kind of takes up the bottom right half of the canvas. So the river goes off the edge. There's still some greenery on the bottom left of the canvas. So we take this river down, and it's wide down here, and it kind of stops. So the bottom right half is all water down here. There's the edging of the river is kind of jagged, so you can create the edge so it's not like a smooth line. We have a lot of like little horizontal lines kind of going left and right on the edging. So like right here, this kind of dips in. Yours will look different from mine. That's okay. I did this painting twice. A lot of times I'll paint my paintings twice. I'll do a practice and then I'll do a recording. But I still get frustrated when my second one doesn't look like the original, but it's, again, I say this a lot, every painting is going to look different. Even if you do it twice, it's going to look different. So you're just going to have to embrace the difference. So what I'm doing here is I'm just adding white into the water to get that kind of variation in color. There will be some yellow in this, but we're going to let this blue dry before we add the yellow reflection in the water. That will turn green if we add that now. Taking that white, just kind of going back over this very gently, create that variation in color, making sure it's all solid so none of the canvas is still showing through. I'm not trying to over blend this, so I want a lot of that original darker blue still showing through, but with this white just kind of blending gently. So back here way in the distance, I'm doing more kind of dense white lines that are closer together. So when you're done with your river, go ahead and rinse the 12 bright, and let's add the brilliant yellow green to our palette. We're going to paint all the green land area next. And so you can choose to do this with the bigger flat brush or the smaller flat brush, or you can use both. So I have Brilliant Yellow Green, Hooker's Green Hue Permanent, and Mars Black, and we'll be using those 3 colors. Right now, I'm gonna use the 3/4 flat, but if you want to use the other flat brush, you are definitely welcome to. let's go ahead and make a very pretty kind of light spring green. So we're going to create perspective in our landscape by making the land area lighter in the distance and then darker towards the bottom. So on our palette, I have brilliant yellow green mixed with a little bit of white. I even put a little bit of the blue in there as well. So it's a very light color. And we can do left and right strokes. Start at the top. So we're not doing any texture right now. We're just filling the white space with our first layer. So this is kind of the under layer of our landscape. And we're doing left and right strokes. So when we get to the edge of the river, you want to just get your stroke as close as possible. If you end up having to paint over part of the river, that's fine. But we want, because the river's got like a really jagged edge, it's kind of tedious to really get in there and fill in all that white space. So you might have to end up covering part of it in still kind of a jagged way, and that's fine. So like right here, when we get too close to the river, you can kind of wiggle your brush the same way that you did when you created the river, but then the rest of the way you can do left and right strokes. So with this light green color, I'm going to go down maybe 3 inches with it before I start blending a darker green into my landscape. So when you go down, about halfway down, grab your darker green, that Hooker's green hue. And again, this is still left and right strokes. We're not worried about texture yet. And so the bottom part is that darker green and it blends up into the lighter green. So we basically just want to make it look like our flat land area is dark at the bottom, and then it gets lighter the further it gets. So this dark green is taking over a lot of that. And we can always go back in and add more lighter green if needed. Grab that light green and help blend this over here. Again, getting as close to that river as possible. Left and right strokes. Filling up all the blank spots of the canvas. And again, we're not worried about texture in the land just yet. So we're going to do the same thing on the left. The bottom left greenery area of this painting is actually kind of dark and shadowy, but let's just make sure we do that dark green first, and then it goes up and it blends to our lighter green. On the edges over here, I'm kind of making my strokes go a little bit curved, as if that land is kind of dipping down into the river. You can do the same if you want. And then up here, blend that with the rest of that light green, bringing that light green kind of down into that darker green. Does not have to be a perfect blend. Getting that lighter green, blend it back up. And it doesn't have to be equal on each side. So if one side looks a little bit darker than the right side, that's okay. Let's go and paint our mountains next. So assuming the sky is dry, if the sky is not dry, you can go ahead and dry your painting or take a break and come back, because we can't do our mountains if our yellow is too wet right now. So let's make sure we have Mars Black and Titanium White on our palette, because we're going to be making a gray. And this is the 12 bright brush. I am going to mix about equal parts yellow and black together. It's going to make kind of a medium to dark gray. And then I'm going to use the tip of my brush to go ahead and draw my mountain lines. So keep it in mind that we're going to have a sun kind of peeking over the mountain. So we want to, so like right here, it's going to start out kind of high, maybe a smaller peak, but like right here is where I want my sun to be. So make like an area of a lower mountain area. But the rest of it doesn't really matter. So I did like 4 peaks, and the edges of the peaks aren't exactly smooth. They're kind of a little bit wavy on the edges. And then we want to just go ahead and fill in the rest of our mountain. So there's two ways you can do this. You can paint all of your mountain ranges solid color gray and then go blend your white, or you can blend your white as you go. And what I mean by blending white is that the bottom of the mountain is going to be lighter than the top of the mountain. That's going to create perspective in our mountains. So you want, as you're painting these, you want your top part to be darker. So you have your darker gray at top, and then the bottom part is lighter. So then you blend your light color towards the bottom. This peak actually got a little bit lighter than I wanted it to be. Or you can do it opposite. You can do light first and then go in and do your darker color. Also doesn't have to be a perfect blend. That sun could be hitting the mountain in so many different ways that we have different colors in there, different shades of gray, and that's okay. But for the most part, dark at the top and light at the bottom. Kind of short, choppy strokes going in like an angled direction. I'm not getting super detailed in these mountains. So very simple mountains. Grabbing a little bit of white. We can do white at the bottom, blend it up. Also, the base of your mountain does not have to be perfectly straight. In other words, if it dips down under the horizon line slightly or overlaps part of the green, that's okay. In fact, we're going to actually bring our green landscape up a little bit. And I'll show you that when I'm finished with the mountains. I'm just taking this white and just kind of adding a little bit extra lighter color towards the base. So I'm going to rinse the gray. Actually, I'm just going to wipe it off. So with the towel, I just wiped all that gray off, and I'm grabbing just the brilliant yellow green. And so the land that's way, way far away, I'm actually going to bring it up so that it slightly overlaps. So it's like this land back here is a little bit elevated. So it gives it the illusion that there's another part, maybe small hill back there that kind of overlaps the base of our mountain. So we're just bringing that up, kind of making like a little hilly area using just the brilliant yellow green. It shouldn't be dark. It's almost like it's just blending with the base of that mountain. So that is our land way in the distance. This next step in the painting is going to be a little bit tricky. So if you're a super beginner painter, I encourage you to kind of watch how I do it first before you try it. Also, it's optional. So if you don't want to do this, we're doing texture in the landscape. So if you don't want to add this texture thing in the landscape and you like the way it looks, the simplified version right now, you can leave it like this, and I think it looks fine. But I'm going to take this one step further and add some shadows and highlights and grass textures. So I'm using the bright brush and just with the green, and I'm adding that green on the tip of the brush. So I'm kind of pouncing my brush, just using the tip, and then along the edges of our river, along the flatter horizontal edges, I'm adding this darker color to create some shadow in that area. So all along the river bank, the edge of the river, I'm tapping the brush. This is just the green. Tapping the brush and kind of bringing it inwards in the land a little bit too. And that's creating texture. Just along the edges. We'll do it on the left part of the river too, but for now we're just doing it on the right part. So just tapping the brush. We can even have pieces kind of overlapping a river. Maybe some greenery kind of goes over into the water part. Back here, I'm doing a little bit of dark back here, but back here it's actually really bright and light, so maybe there's not a lot of darker back there. I'm going to add some of the lighter green on my palette. And in here, the rest of this landscape, I'm just going to do these kind of like expressive, I'm still using the end of my brush to kind of tap it. Down here, our strokes can kind of go up. So just kind of dragging the brush up to create some grass texture, kind of in the middle area. Right here we have more of that texture along the riverbank, the darker color, and then dragging it upwards to create kind of this illusion of grass. We can introduce Mars Black, just be really careful with the black because it's super strong. But down here at the very, very bottom edge of that land, I did little bits of black just on the bottom edge. So just tapping that tip of the brush very, very lightly, just on the bottom edges, that little black, blending it very, very slightly with that green, horizontally, just on the horizontal edges that kind of go in on the river. I'm going to wipe that off and then go back, maybe kind of drag this down just a little bit further, maybe drag it up to create some grass strokes in there, blend it back in with the green. And then I'm just going to keep going with this. So grabbing that green, adding some texture over here, dragging my brush in kind of angled directions, creating that texture. Maybe we have some lighter color in there too. So I grabbed the brilliant yellow green, doing that kind of angled thing. So just dragging it up in kind of different angles. In the distance, we want to make sure it still stays lighter in the distance. So we don't want to make it too shadowy or too light way, way back by our mountains. We could, if we wanted to, use that lighter color to create some texture as well. So these, again, these are just kind of expressive diagonal strokes up here. Way back here, I made my strokes go more horizontal. I also grabbed that white. It ended up being a little bit gray because it accidentally grabbed some of that black, so that wasn't intentional to add that gray in there. But we're just gonna kind of be okay with that for now. So we're gonna do the same thing over here on the left, using that darker green, little tiny, tiny bits of black. Just be really careful not to do too much black. Very, very gently right there on that bottom edge, that riverbank, do that darker color. There's not a whole lot of black way in the distance because it should be lighter in the distance. And then getting that green, just very gently blending that green back up, tapping the brush to wipe that off. Too much black on the brush at that point. Then go in here, textured strokes on the edges, getting that darker part to kind of blend to the left with that green color. And then not a whole lot of dark way in the distance. So down here we can start doing more of the dragging strokes upwards. So using that full width of the brush, kind of dragging it up, creating different sort of angles. Maybe some of this is kind of overlapping parts of the waters. Maybe there's like grass overlapping. So we could even go down here using the full width of the brush, dragging it up so that the paint sort of disappears. You can see that it looks translucent. So we can see that water through there, but there's little patches of grass. So in this area, this is actually where we're going to be painting the lavender type of flower. But that's kind of the grass greenery part of it. Later on, we'll add the purple. So in this area, it's very dark and shadowy in this bottom left area. So a little bit extra black down there. So you can decide if you like the textured look or if you liked how it looked before, just the flat color. If you're a beginner and you're okay with the flat and you don't want to try the texture thing, you don't have to do the texture thing. So I'll leave that up to you. I'm gonna go back, maybe add some lighter texture up here. Kind of flat, kind of what I did on the left part. So maybe some more kind of grass, different angled strokes. Few little pieces kind of overlapping parts of the riverbank. So that is it for our land texture, and we're going to go ahead and add our yellow sky reflection into the water. Also optional, if you don't want to add yellow into your river, you don't have to. If you like the way it looks, you just leave it how it is. But the river's dry, so it's not going to turn green if I do this. Let's mix our yellow and white together. Clean, dry, number 12 bright brush. And let's go ahead and very gently, using the tip of the brush, adding little areas. I'm doing this all in horizontal lines, using the same technique I did to paint the river. But very, very light, just using the tip of the brush, kind of wiggling my hand left and right to create some very, that yellow reflection line. So I'm not trying to cover all of the blue. I'm creating a layer over it. So way back in the distance, there's a lot of like the lines are super close together, kind of more dense, but like as you go down here, the lines are more loose, more spread apart and longer. That's how you can create some perspective in your reflection lines. We're going to paint that sun and the sun rays next. So let's go ahead and rinse that 12 braid off, and let's get our number 4 round brush ready. Go ahead and load your number 4 round brush in titanium white, and let's just kind of figure out where this sun is going to be. So I'm going to have mine not down here. We could put it down here, but I'm going to have it kind of peeking out of the mountain over here. You can change the location of it if you want, but just paint a small white circle. Just take your finger, smear it outwards. That's going to make a bright glow, and then go back in. So when you do these sun rays, you want to kind of drag that wet paint outwards. You can still load white on your brush, but you don't want a lot of white on your brush because we're essentially dry brushing this. So dry brush means you are kind of dragging paint on your canvas, but there's not a lot of paint on your brush, with the intent of it being translucent over what you're painting on. So you're just taking that and you're just dragging your sun rays going out in a circular direction. You can do as many sun rays as you want. You can have them overlap your mountains and overlap the sky, and then go back and paint a solid circle with just the titanium white over that. So we have the sun, and then we have the glow around it and the rays. Next, we're going to paint the trees. So if you feel comfortable just painting them in, you can. If you want to use a piece of chalk or pencil to draw them out first, you're welcome to do that as well. So I'm using a number 12 bright brush in the color Mars Black. Let's go ahead and start on the lower left part of our canvas area, and let's do this large tree that kind of divides our painting in half. So let's have the bottom be kind of wide and trumpeted out a little bit, but then let's slowly start sketching it up, and our trunk gets a little bit narrow as we work up. It's going to divide, or it's going to cross the river. So little strokes at a time, just barely sketching that tree. Again, that's why I said if you want to do this with chalk first, you can. Just using the tip of the brush to create that thin line. So we have thick that goes to thin. Just applying that paint little bits at a time. If you find that your black is not flowing very easy, you can add a little bit of water in there to help that. This tree is going to go around the sun. So I don't want to cover up that sun at all. I'm going to make sure my branches go around that. So our sun is in between the two branches. And then I can create the base of those branches, make them kind of wider at the base, and make sure that they go thinner towards the edge. The branches go all the way to the top of the canvas. I'm going to make this branch a little bit thicker. And then make sure that it goes thinner. So again, I'm using that tip of the brush, holding it on its side to get these thinner lines. And then we can start creating some smaller branches. So using the tip of the brush, holding it very lightly to get those thin lines. And I'm just going to go in and make some more smaller branches. I'm going to give the edge of this tree a little bit of shape by kind of curving parts of it outwards a little bit, so it's not exactly straight on the edges. And next I'm going to make a second tree. So this one's going to be a very similar style to the one that I just painted. It's going to be going to the left and up high. So again, starting out wide, gently kind of sketching it up so that trunk gets narrow towards the top, and then it splits off into more branches. And then off the canvas, these branches ended up having to overlap the other branches of the tree next to it, but that's okay. And then we have this smaller tree over here. Again, same style, but we got to keep in mind that this one's going to be further in the landscape. So we want to make sure that the branches are thinner, especially the base. The base of that tree is a lot thinner than the trees that we did in the front. That's how we can create perspective in our landscape. But the branches still go all the way to the top of the canvas. Then I'm going to rinse and dry, and I'm going to add more blue into the water. So this is optional. I'm just going to kind of tone this yellow down. So I'm going to take this blue, just add a little bit more blue down here. This is just the blue, not mixed with white, so just a few strokes, that kind of darker color in there in the water. Kind of cover up some of that yellow that was a little too much in some areas. So next, let's add the leaves in the tree. Since this is a spring or summer scene, we would definitely have green foliage. So this is that round bristle brush that I mentioned earlier. So I use this brush in landscape paintings to create texture. If you don't have this particular brush, you can do this with a flat brush. Just use the tip and use the tip to stamp it, or you can get a bundle of Q-tips and try it that way. But we're just using the Hooker's green hue color with a little bit of black in there to darken that green. So we want to start out dark and we want to gradually build to create lighter foliage. So this is the dark one, dark layer, and you're just tapping the brush, creating clusters of leaves in that tree canopy that's on all three of those trees. So we're mostly on the top of the canvas, on the top edge of the canvas. And it's okay that this cluster of leaves that we're creating aren't all attached to branches. You can still create the impression of leaves without having to paint every single branch. And then as you go to reload, we can grab just the green instead of green and black. We can wipe the brush off to get the black off. I'm going to load more green. So we're going to use just the green without the black and keep applying that layer. Let's grab some yellow now. So the yellow is going to lighten that green up just slightly. And I'm adding the lighter color, but I'm not trying to cover all of the darker color. So the sun is below this in our painting. Actually, this is in front. So the sun would be kind of making the edges of this light. But I'm going to do the lighter color mostly towards the bottom, but keep the very top of the tree canopy kind of darker. So I'm just taking this and adding this next layer of lighter color. And we don't want to cover up too much of that sky, so we still want a lot of that blue from the sky still showing through. With this layer, I'm using titanium white, and I'm mixing titanium white with that green and yellow, and just on the bottom of those little clusters, adding that light, but not trying to cover up any of the dark, or all of the dark, so just towards the bottom. So that creates depth in your tree canopy with all the different kinds of tints of green. So I'm done with that brush for now, unless I want to do touch-ups later and add more green up at the top. But right now I'm going to switch back to the number 4 round brush. I'm going to do a few grass blade strokes kind of towards the bottom of the painting and also shadow. So the tree that's on the right, since it's on the ground, it would likely be casting some kind of shadow. So let's mix a very small amount of black into our green. And let's make it loose by adding water to that. So a little bit of a watercolor consistency with that. And just loosely paint a diagonal line area going down from the tree. And that's going to give it the illusion that it's got a shadow. If needed, you can add a little bit more black in there to darken it. But that's very loosely done. And then I'm going to take this dark green that I created that's already loose and do a few grass blade strokes kind of down here. We did that earlier with the flat brush, but I'm making some that are more defined, more pointed. And that's going to help for when we just paint some of the lavender flowers down there. It's going to give us some grass pieces within the lavender. I did a few darker, almost like silhouette grass lines that are at the base of that tree. And next I'm going to add texture to the tree. So with the brown. So this is burnt sienna. This is also an optional step that requires blending and adding some texture into the bark of the tree. If you don't want to do this, you don't have to. You can also watch me do it first and decide if you want to do this or not. But I'm taking that burnt umber, burnt sienna, added a little bit of titanium white into it. So that lightens that color up. And I'm going to take the round brush and loosely paint one side of the tree, just the edges. So I'm doing this in very loose strokes that are kind of going curvy, going in the direction of that tree branch. I don't want to cover all of the black. That black is essential, but adding that bit of color, like right here in between where those branches are opening, where that sun might be shining, it's going to give it some really pretty highlights. I'm going to do this on this tree as well. I can always go back and make it darker if I don't like how light it turns. So So very, very loose. This is a really pretty reddish brown color. Very loosely paint up, adding little bits of white in there for color variation. Not trying to cover up all of the black. A little bit of white just on the far edge of the tree trunk. I'm going to do the same for this little guy back here. Next, we are going to load our palette with titanium white. So I'm going to paint the little white flowers that are kind of all throughout the landscape. It adds a really pretty touch to this. It's optional. If you don't want to do this, you don't have to. But way back here, they're very, very tiny. So I want to make sure that they are tiny, but down here, I'm pressing slightly harder on my brush to make them kind of larger. All I'm doing is painting dots. So it just creates the illusion that there's little white flowers kind of scattered all throughout our landscape. They would be tiny and closer together the further we get, and they would be larger and farther apart the lower we get in the landscape. Also, it's not, they're kind of scattered randomly. They don't really make a pattern or anything, so you can do the same, scatter them randomly all throughout. And then down here, we can do little 4 or 5 petal pieces since they're closer up. And then let's go ahead and paint the lavender. So I have Dioxazine Purple loaded on my palette and titanium white. So we want to kind of go back and forth with the purple and white. That purple is a really dark purple, but adding white into it will lighten it up. So I'm just creating little tiny marks at the bottom, going in kind of a vertical format. Just kind of overlap each other. So I start at the top, make little marks, and just kind of work my way down. Each little mark is kind of going diagonally up and overlapping the previous marks. These are just the tips of lavender flowers, and they're kind of going at different angles. I'm varying that purple so it's lighter or darker in some areas. And there's our up close of our little gathering of lavender on the bottom. The last parts of this painting really include touch-ups as needed. So if you want to add more reflection in the water, you can. I'm going to go back in and just add a little bit more light blue to kind of drown out more of this yellow, kind of smooth some of these lines that I thought might be too harsh, might be too defined. So I'm using the full width of the brush, just very lightly going in there with some of the white and the blue. A few more yellow lines in there. And then if you want, you can add more green texture up at the top. So I went in with my Hooker's green hue, kind of extended some of these little bits of green, made a few extra pieces down here. And then with the round brush, very much on the edge right here of these tree branches, little pop of white highlight where that sun would be hitting those branches. And that is the conclusion of how to paint this beautiful spring landscape. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and thanks for painting with me.